The Cheltenham Festival is one of the biggest events in the racing calendar. It captures the imagination of not only the racing fans, but also general sporting fans. And if you are one of those general sporting fans, then the world of racing can sometimes be a little bit confusing, what with all that jargon and mumbo jumbo. So I've grabbed ITV Racing's Oli Bell to try and help us work some of that jargon out.
Yeah.
Really?
Try and break down the mumbo jumbo for you.
It's a Yorkshire term which means gobbledygook.
I love it.
So we are in the Hall of Fame here at Cheltenham, as you can see. It's a wonderful looking place, all previous Gold Cup winners hanging from the ceiling. So what better place to try and pick this festival apart? Firstly, Ollie, what is it about the Cheltenham Festival, the Gold Cup, the Arkle, what is it about these races that captures the wider public imagination?
Well, you're bang on, because racing is a year-round sport, as we know, but Cheltenham, everyone's looking at this sport for that week. And that is because, I think a lot of people have said it in the past, it's the Olympics of our sport. It's where the best horses, with the best trainers, the best jockeys, invariably the most high-profile owners, send their best runners. And the racing just gives you so much, so often. Every race gives you a terrific story, a terrific finish, a wonderful ride. So if you can imagine Lionel Messi scoring his sort of 20 best goals across 4 days in an incredible venue, that's essentially what we get here at Cheltenham through the week.
I mean, that is a hell of a build-up. And obviously it's going to be a very different Cheltenham Festival 2021, of course, with the global pandemic happening. How is that going to change things here at the festival?
Well, look, ultimately, in terms of the action on track, it won't change anything, because once the tapes rise in the races, the horses are doing what they do week in, week out. They're racing against each other and providing us with great entertainment. So the crux of this great week is about the action on track, and that's not going to change. There will be a massive hole, obviously, because we won't hear that iconic Cheltenham Festival roar in the Sky Bet Supreme. We won't see owners being able to celebrate what I'm sure are lifelong dreams to win at the Cheltenham Festival. And there will be a quiet atmosphere when horses come back into the winners' enclosure, but it's our job on ITV and amongst the other broadcasters to make sure that that incredible sense of occasion, the wonderful sport that we're able to watch here live, is brought to people at home. And hopefully we can do it justice. We are trying and will try our best to be able to capture that exhilaration of this week to what we hope are going to be millions watching from their living rooms.
So of course, at home, you might be, picking your horses, looking for your favourites. It might be based on the colour of the silks or the name of the horse or your favourite jockey maybe. So we're going to try and help you pick apart that form guide. You can head over to sportinglife.com where you can fully inform yourself. Racing is for everybody. It's not just for, people that have been in racing a long time or, racing experts. It is for everybody. Head over to sportinglife.com and you'll find out everything you need to know. But we're going to try and break down the basics for you now. Let's start with the form card. So obviously those who aren't that familiar with racing, they're going to look at the form card. They might be looking at the horses' names or the colours, as I said, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it? So let's start with the form. So the little numbers across the bottom, what do they mean? Yeah,
and it's a good point, because I think when a lot of people pick up a race card, check out on Sporting Life the form, and they might not have that much previous knowledge of the sport, it can look quite busy, if you like. It can look quite daunting. But actually, I think what we're going to do is hopefully really beneficial to a lot of people, because when we break it down, it hopefully won't be that complicated. And obviously, the more you know, the more detailed you can get with it. But the very basic thing to look at is their form. And that is in that column with numbers normally to the left-hand side of their name. And that will have their finishing positions from races previously run. The most recent run will be the closest number to their name, and so on and so on. So if they've got a 1 next to their name, that means that they won their last start. If the time before they have a 3, you'll see 3-1. There are letters in there as well, and that stands for certain things in a race that can happen. A P means pulled up, for example. A U means unseated rider, which means the jockey has come off but the horse hasn't hit the ground. F means he fell, which means the horse has hit the ground. And therefore you've got various different signs of the form within that, either alphabetical or numerical. What you want to see is someone like Envoy Allen, who's one of the leading fancies for the Cheltenham Festival, and all you will see in that column is ones, because he's never been beaten. So he's an unbeaten horse. So that is a very simple, hopefully, explanation as to what you can see next to a horse's name with regards to their form.
Okay, we should add that form's not a guarantee that horse is going to win the next race.
No, for sure. Well, that's the thing. That's where you get slightly more advanced, because then you want to look at the strength of that form. How good was that victory? Was that victory in a weaker level of race than the one he's running in? Was it in a better race? And then once you start going that little bit deeper, the second layer, if you like, you can then try and solve the puzzle. And there is something really fun about that. I mean, a lot of people can be put off by the complexity of it, but actually the reason I really enjoyed it was because I saw it as a challenge. I saw it as a jigsaw puzzle. And once you start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, you can start to get a picture in your head of how you think a race is going to unfold, and hopefully find a winner or two.
Okay, well there's a Sporting Life race card on the screen now. Underneath the name of the horse there, we can see a few categories. So we've got age, weight, jockey, trainer, and the OR, is that the overall rating?
Overall rating, yeah.
Not just a pretty face. So how important are those statistics? So let's start with the age of the horse. How important is that? Do you want to look for a younger horse, an older horse, a middle-aged horse? What are we looking for?
Well, to just break that down slightly further, some races will be for horses of a certain age.
Okay.
So the Triumph Hurdle, for example, is for younger horses. So invariably you'll see 4-year-olds in the Triumph Hurdle. The Supreme Novices Hurdle, sponsored by Sky Bet, that is a race that has horses at the relatively early stage of their career. So invariably you'll see younger horses in that. Same with the novice races. They're called novice races, novice hurdles or novice chases. So the novice races does what it says on the tin. They're novices, they're inexperienced.
So that's just the horse, isn't it? That's not the jockey as well?
No, just the horse. So if you're running in a novice, invariably you're starting out on your career. When you get to a race like the Gold Cup, that is an all-age race. So you can be 15, if you like, in the Gold Cup. You're not going to be, as a general rule, traditionally a sort of peak age for a Gold Cup horse, you'd expect to see maybe between 8 and 10, 8, 9, 10. And that is when horses have had the earlier experience in novice company and moved their way into open company. So it's very much horses for courses in terms of where they're at in their career. But for the championship races, such as the Queen Mother Champion Chase, the Stayers Hurdle and the Gold Cup, you would expect to see horses at their peak at between 8 and 10, I'd say.
Okay. And the weight of the horse. Now, this sounds complicated because obviously, in my experience, the heavier you are, the slower you are. Is that the same for the horse? And does that weight include the jockey? How does that work?
So the heavier you are in handicaps invariably means the better you are. And what a handicap does is essentially try and level out the field. So the dream of the handicapper is for them to all finish in a line. And therefore, the handicapper has to allocate them a handicap mark based on his or her assessment of their ability. So let's just break this down into very simple terms. If I can run a 100-meter race 10 seconds quicker than you, then you're very slow because I'm not very quick. But what someone would do is give me a suitcase, essentially a backpack with some weight on my back to slow me down so that time difference can be negated.
Okay.
So therefore, if you are a horse carrying 11 stone 12, which is invariably top weight in handicaps, you will have a higher rating than a horse who's carrying 10 stone, which will be at the bottom of the handicap. And as I say, the plan is for everyone to finish in a line. So it negates the differential in ability. I've probably overcomplicated that, but essentially weight is...
Well, imagine Sergio Aguero playing for Manchester City against Yeovil. You need to put concrete boots on him to make it fair.
Well, it's a slight disservice to the great green and white army, but yes, essentially. It's just a way of levelling the playing field, essentially. So, and that's, again, if you want to take it to a second layer, once you see the handicap mark, the OR as you highlighted, you can then look at their past performances based on their handicap mark. Now, you'll see going into Cheltenham, some horses' career profiles going like that, and the handicapper might not have got to the bottom of that horse's ability, which means that he could be, what we say in the industry, ahead of the handicapper. And that means he might have a few pounds or potentially even stone up his sleeve and therefore is capable of winning off his mark. Or you could flip that round, have a horse who was very, very good and is climbing down the weights because he hasn't quite been in the same form. But you know on his old form, he's got the proven ability from previous runs to be capable of winning off that mark.
Okay. Let's move on to the jockeys then. Obviously, there are hundreds of jockeys. It's an extremely important job. You know, there are a lot of people that maybe aren't that familiar with racing that think, well, what's the jockey? You know, he's just sitting on this horse and the horse is doing the work. But I had a go. It's really hard.
And very funny.
So how important is looking out for the right jockey? Obviously, there are household names like Frankie Dettori, Oisin Murphy. But what are we looking out for there as far as names are concerned?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple of flat jockeys. So Royal Ascot, everyone's looking for Frankie. He's the best jockey in the weighing room.
Also, they don't even run at Cheltenham.
No, they don't know. This is national hunt racing.
My apologies.
But the point is that Royal Ascot, everyone's backing Frankie. And the reason they're backing Frankie is because he's the best known jockey, but he's also probably going to be riding the best horse in the race, or certainly near there. So it's pretty sensible to side with Frankie. In national hunt racing, you had jockeys like AP McCoy and Ruby Walsh, who are now retired, but they would be the go-to names. And Ruby's record here at Cheltenham was phenomenal. Barry Geraghty, another one, now retired. So you've got more of the youngsters coming through. Harry Cobden's a rising star in the weighing room. Brian Hughes is champion jockey, but hasn't.
Daryl Jacobs, Sporting Life ambassador.
Yeah, but my favourite, I was going to say.
I see. Sorry.
No, I wasn't going to say that actually, although he is. Daryl Jacobs had tremendous success at the festival, and then you've got the Irish jockeys coming over who might be less familiar to once-a-year racegoers because they don't see their name on the race card all the time. And the names you need to look out for are the likes of Paul Townend, who will ride Willie Mullins' horses, and Willie was going to have a host of chances. And then possibly a jockey who could be leading rider at this year's festival is Rachel Blackmore. She's the star of Irish racing. She's neck and neck with Paul Townend for the Irish Jockeys Championship. She'll ride horses like Honeysuckle, who's favourite for the Champion Hurdle, the big race on day one. And she is just an incredibly talented jockey. As well as that, over here you've got the likes of Bryony Frost, which I'm sure will have a lot of neutrals cheering her on. She's won the King George this year. So there are big names who will have big rides, and if you're new to it and you want to follow a jockey, that's not the worst thing to do. It helps you educate yourself on the horses they're riding and things like that. And I think actually, as an entry-level point into it, if you can attach yourself to a jockey that you like or a trainer that you like, you'll have plenty of opportunities to cheer throughout the week.
Okay. There are obviously, of course, some huge name trainers that you might be or might not be familiar with. Of course, Willie Mullins, the Sporting Life ambassador, Nicky Henderson. How important, again, is the trainer? Is that essentially like looking at teams that are managed by, you know, a football team that might be managed by Jose Mourinho, Alex Ferguson, that sort of thing? Yeah,
well, it's a good point, actually. Look at Pep Guardiola, right? His career CV is Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Man City. So he is not only regarded as the best manager in the world, but he's also dealing with the best players. So the trainers that you're looking out for are the best trainers, but they're also getting sent the best horses, the most expensive horses at the sales, for example. And so it's a pretty safe bet that the horses that they send to run at this premier meeting at the Cheltenham Festival are going to be, if not the best, then pretty close to the best. So the names that you would want to look out for, and there are four basically. You can split it into two either side of the Irish Sea. In Ireland, you've got Willie Mullins. Slightly below that is Henry de Bromhead, who's got a number of live chances. And then in England, you've got Nicky Henderson and Paul Nicholls. And year on year, they battle it out for the Trainers' Championship. So those are the 4 or 5 names that you'd expect to have plenty of runners here this week. So they'll have a number of live chances, and they are normally battling out for leading trainer at this week.
Okay, so that's a basic look at the form card. We'll just rattle through now a few terms that you might have heard and you're not that familiar with. Let's start with fences and hurdles. To me, sound the same thing. What's the difference?
Size, basically.
Okay.
And in this instance, size does matter because fences are bigger than hurdles. Invariably, through the week, you'll have half of the races will be hurdles, half will be chases, is another word, chase races over fences. So when you're looking in the race card, you may see something chase or something hurdle. If it's a chase, it's the one over the bigger fences. And if it's a hurdle, obviously it's the one over the smaller hurdles. And invariably horses progress from bumpers, which is races without any obstacles, to hurdles, and then go on to be chasers.
Okay. Next up, we want to have a look at travelling. So we might hear the commentator say he's travelling well. Shed some light on it for us, Ollie.
Well, that is very much a visual impression, and sometimes you'll see, like, if you were ever, I don't know whether you ever did it, right? Did you ever sit on an armchair and pretend to be a jockey when you were a kid?
I did. In between that and pretending to be David Hasselhoff using my mum's ironing board. But yeah, right. I did used to do that. I did.
So when you do that on the armchair, you'd get low and you'd ride out a finish like that, right? And I did that. I had a rocking horse. I thought I'd won the Gold Cup about 8,000 times when I was a kid. I suppose the opposite to that is when you're travelling well, which is when you're sat up, you're not moving, you're relaxed, you've got a tight hold of the reins and the bit in the horse's mouth. So you're very much in control of what the horse is doing, and you're reserving as much energy as possible. So you're keeping it on a tight rein so the horse doesn't exert itself, and therefore you've got a bit in the tank so that when you get down and start driving, the horse is responding to that.
I mean, to expand on that, really interestingly, horses kind of have like these reserve blood cells that when they're tired, they can call upon. I mean, they don't think, I'll call upon my reserves now, but those blood cells are there so that almost like they take a huge deep breath. Like horses have got huge nostrils that they can't breathe through their mouth, so they take in that air through their nostrils into their lungs that are like 2 meters, like they're massive lungs. And on the final strip, particularly at Cheltenham, they come around the bend and they've got the final hill to go. They take in that breath of air. It's almost like refueling a car. It's fascinating. I don't know if that's anything to do with how well you travel, but knowing that about a horse and the science behind how a horse works is, it totally changes the way you watch a race. Google it.
And also as well, like a horse like Big Bucks, who was one of the best staying hurdlers in recent years, he was racing about 10 years ago. In the middle part of a race, he would hit what people would call a flat spot. So that's when the jockey just had to sort of wake him up and get him concentrating again. So for certain horses, hitting a flat spot isn't necessarily the worst thing. Paisley Park, who is the favourite for this year's Stayers Hurdle, the big race on the Thursday, he hits a flat spot as well. So for these horses that race over staying trips, sometimes they can hit a flat spot and then you might hear a commentator say, came back on the bridle, which means the jockey's then sort of urged him along, woken him up, he's filled up his lungs and then got back on the bridle, and he can go back to travelling well and nice and relaxed. And it doesn't always mean that they're not travelling if they are being ridden along, but invariably if you're watching a race and your jockey's low in the saddle and driving him along, it's not the best thing to see.
Okay. You mentioned they're staying. If we hear a commentator say that, what is that, staying on?
Staying on simply means that he's doing his best work at the finish. He's running on past tired horses. You can, again, if you wanted to get very advanced, you could look at sectional times and you could see that horses who perhaps did a lot in the early part of the race in terms of what they were clocking on the clock, they might get tired late on, and vice versa, flip that on its head. If you were reserving energy, you then do your best work late on and stay on at the finish. Staying races are over, say, upwards of 3 miles and upwards. The Grand National obviously is an extreme staying test. It's 4.5 miles. And some of the quicker races at Cheltenham will be run over 2 miles, so you need a speedier type for that than a stayer. But you still need to stay because there's a fairly large hill at Cheltenham up the finish, and that can find plenty of horses out.
We've got a fair few more terms that were sent into us on Sporting Life FC. I don't think we're going to get time to go through them all, so we'll quickly look at hacking up. Is that what I think it is? The horsey's hooves are just ripping up the ground? It's
hacking up? Well, no, that just means that they've won very easily.
Oh, okay.
Hacking up, yeah.
All right, that was an
hosing up, hacking up, bolting up.
Okay, fine. If
they're like that, then I think we can get through all of them.
Right, okay. I mean, that kind of covers things. You talked to us about on the bridle and things like that, so we've covered that. Horses, quite often, the trainers will decide to use an extra bit of equipment to keep the horse focused. So let's have a quick look at those before we finish. Let's start with cheek pieces. They look nice, but what's their purpose? What are they doing?
That's just to keep a horse concentrated. I've never been a horse, Dom. It's a very weird I've never been a horse, so I can't tell you exactly what they do, but essentially it's just sheepskin pieces that they stick on the side of here essentially on the horse's head. And I think that's just to allow the horse to keep his eyes focused in a straight line and not sort of get distracted by anything that's going on around them.
Okay, so what's the difference between the cheek pieces then and blinkers?
Well, there is a middle ground, and that's a visor.
Okay.
And a visor is only sort of like half the eye is covered, whereas blinkers is the whole eye is covered. So
how does it see?
Not the whole. You basically just they cover more of the eye, so they're more focused.
So it's less, because obviously you're running in a race, there are a lot of horses alongside them.
Yeah.
It's just to rule out
It's
distractions.
essentially just to, if you can imagine when you put binoculars over your eyes, right, you take out most of your peripheral vision, so you can't be distracted by what's going on around you. So with every level, the three things we mentioned there, cheek pieces, visor and blinkers, are essentially just to keep the horse as focused as possible and running in a straight line, eyes on the prize, essentially. And you wouldn't, not every horse would have it. In fact, in a race, probably only 10% might have it. But you just have that for horses who might have a tendency to idle late on and just look around, or who perhaps switch off in the middle part of a race and just need to keep concentrated and alert. A horse like Altior is a very good horse. He's one of the best there's ever been. He can have a tendency to be a little bit lazy in his races, and perhaps connections might call on cheek pieces for him or headgear for him at Cheltenham. And Santini's another horse that they might put headgear on him for Cheltenham, and that might wake him up a bit. So it's a tool to just keep a horse concentrated, essentially.
Okay. Well, Oli, thank you very much, man. I think that's just about covered the basics. I mean, you'll be amazed at how racing has made its way into like everyday vernacular, like starting from scratch refers to like a false start in a race and you bring everyone back to scratch. Winning hands down is literally referring to how a jockey's holding.
And actually just, I hope people have learnt from that, not only that I've never been a horse, but hopefully useful stuff. But actually what is important is I think it's really important to get the message across to people who are perhaps watching this who have never studied a form card in their life, that yes, it can be complicated, but that shouldn't scare us. Like a lot of sports now, right, are very complicated. If you look at baseball, right, they went to the Moneyball system, and a lot of it is data and numbers and statistics and things like that. But actually the sport benefited for it. If you look at cycling, for example, a hugely popular sport, there's quite a lot of intricacies to what goes on in a cycling race. And horse racing, yes, it is fairly nuanced, and it is quite intimidating if you've never been to it. But once you start to explore it as a sport and the information that's presented to you, you can find out so much about what is a terrific sport, but also you can educate yourself to a position where you can start forming opinions about races, so that if you ever come here to Cheltenham or you're in the pub watching it with your mates, fingers crossed we can all do that soon, you can look at a race and rather than going, oh, I've heard John said that this horse was travelling well or whatever, or going well at home, you can actually look at the race card. It's not that scary, it's not that intimidating, it's really interesting, and you can get an opinion yourself. And I think if we all educate ourselves in everything we do a little bit more, then hopefully everything will be a little bit easier and a lot better fundamentally.
Well, it's amazing to hear you talk about racing with such passion. I mean, obviously, looking at the form, studying the form only enhances the enjoyment of what is already an incredible sport. I had my first Cheltenham here last year, amazing, like the atmosphere is incredible. You're only going to be able to see that on TV now, but it really is a sport that once you are just a tiny bit involved in the sport or start to take an interest in it, it's one that really does grab you. Right?
Yeah, you're better off talking about that, well, as you just have, because when we started working together, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you probably were a relative newbie into the sport, but doing things, coming to Cheltenham, meeting the people we meet along the way on Sporting Life, it made you want to go and learn about it. Your son now rides horses, and things like that. And actually, I don't know, I'll ask you a question. Has it put you off, or has it made you enjoy the sport more?
Oh, it's made me enjoy it absolutely more. I mean, I've obviously been very lucky. I've been able to go out and visit these trainers and come to some of the biggest racing events. But it is a sport that almost by accident captured me, because it's the same as any other sport. You go to watch a football match for the first time and it's just, you're in awe of it. Yeah. It's exactly the same for me in racing. And I think, my first race was probably at York or something like that, and it's the same whether it's York, Wetherby, Pontefract, Cheltenham or Aintree, something like that. There's just something about it, whether the stands are packed or not even. just seeing those incredible athletes of animals and the hard work the jockeys put in and being able to witness what trainers do. Like you said, it's those tiny nuances, the small things that make the massive difference on the track.
Yeah.
It's not just about the betting. The betting adds to the enjoyment, studying the form adds to the enjoyment, but witnessing it as a sport is what makes it so magic, incredible to me. Yeah.
Look, we want on ITV and Sporting Life for as many new racing fans to come into the sport. That's what we all want in any sport, to have new eyeballs, the next generation loving it. And I hope that we, both on Sporting Life and ITV, can convey that to new fans. And the more new fans we have, the healthier the sport will be, and the future of the sport will be in safe hands.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ollie. Hopefully you all learned something from that there. Don't forget to head over to sportinglife.com to get yourself informed and ahead of the crowd ahead of Cheltenham 2021. You can also download the app on iOS and Android. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube here-ish and watch our other videos there.